He had always loved music, but life had never been kind to him.
From a young age, people had labeled him as different, fragile, or broken. No matter how much he tried to fit in, the world seemed to turn its back on him. At school, teachers overlooked his talent. Friends drifted away, unable to understand why he spoke less, moved slower, or seemed lost in his own thoughts. Music was the only place he felt free, a private world where no one judged him, where every sound he created made him feel alive. But the outside world did not see what he could do. People often whispered behind his back, shaking their heads as he struggled to carry his instruments, his hands sometimes trembling from nerves or pain. He was turned away from auditions, performances, and opportunities that could have allowed him to shine. "He's broken," they said. "He'll never succeed." Those words burned, but they did not stop him. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet fire kept him going. He practiced every day, often alone, sometimes in tiny rooms with thin walls, where the neighbors would complain about the noise. Each note he played was a conversation he had with himself. He didn't need an audience. He only needed the music. Sometimes he imagined someone listening, someone who could understand him. But when he peeked outside his room, the world seemed to ignore him as if he did not exist. Despite the rejection, there were moments of beauty that reminded him why he loved music. A simple melody that flowed perfectly from his fingers, a chord that resonated through the floor, even the way the wind seemed to carry his music out of the window. These small victories made him believe that perhaps, just perhaps, he could create something extraordinary. He tried to connect with other musicians, hoping that collaboration would give him a chance to shine. But even in these circles, people doubted him. They saw his struggle and assumed it was a weakness. They did not realize that his brokenness was not a lack of talent. It was a different kind of strength, one that came from surviving hardship, enduring judgment, and still choosing to create something beautiful every day. Rejection became a familiar friend, though not a comfortable one. Each no stung, but each one also made him stronger in a strange way. He learned patience, resilience, and humility. He learned that sometimes the world's judgments are not about your worth. They are about people's inability to see beyond appearances. And so he continued. He kept practicing, kept dreaming, and kept holding on to the hope that someday someone would hear him. There were days when despair was close, when he questioned why he even tried. He watched other musicians succeed with ease, performing in places he could only dream of. He thought of giving up, of letting the world have its way and accepting that he would remain unseen. But then, he would sit at his instrument and the music would speak to him in ways words never could. The music reminded him that his value was not in recognition or applause, but in expression itself. His family tried to support him, though they didn't always understand. They worried about his future, worried that a life of rejection would break him completely, but they also saw the light in his eyes when he played, the peace that settled over him like a warm blanket, and slowly, they learned to trust that music was not just a hobby for him. It was his lifeline, his voice when the world refused to listen. Every day felt like a battle between the world's rejection and his own determination. Sometimes he would carry his instrument through crowded streets, feeling the stares and whispers, feeling the weight of judgment on his shoulders. And yet, when he reached a quiet place, a park, a small room, or even the corner of his home, he would set up, close his eyes, and play. In those moments, he was unstoppable. In those moments, the broken label meant nothing. In those moments, he was whole. Even though no one else seemed to believe in him, he began to notice small signs of hope. A passerby might pause and listen, a teacher might nod in quiet approval, or another musician might offer a kind word. These tiny acknowledgments became a lifeline, proof that perhaps one day, someone would finally hear him fully, and so, he continued day after day, note after note, driven by a belief that could not be shaken. The world had turned away, yes, but he refused to turn away from himself. He refused to let rejection define him. Somewhere in the quiet corners of his life, in the soft vibrations of the strings, the keys, and the chords, he knew that one day, everything could change with just one note. He could feel it. Deep in his chest, beneath the pain, the loneliness, and the years of being overlooked, there was a sense of anticipation, a whisper that told him the world had not yet seen what he was capable of. He did not know when or where or how, but he believed that if he kept playing, if he kept perfecting his music, The day would come when no one could ignore him. For now, he waited. He practiced. He endured, and he hoped. The world had written him off as broken, but in the quiet strength of his music, he was preparing to prove everyone wrong. The first note he would play for the world would not just be a sound, it would be a statement. It would tell everyone that no amount of rejection could silence talent, courage, and the human spirit. And in that waiting, that practice, and that quiet determination, the stage was being set. He did not know the audience, he did not know the outcome, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The world had not heard his full story yet. And when they did, it would begin with a single note, simple yet powerful enough to change everything. Even though the world had turned its back on him, he never stopped practicing. Each day he would wake up before sunrise, quietly carrying his instrument to a small, secluded corner where no one could watch him struggle. The mornings were peaceful, and he liked it that way. There were no judgments there, no whispered comments, no eyes rolling with impatience. Just him, the instrument, and the music. He experimented with sounds, learning how to make even a single note carry emotion. Sometimes it was soft and sad, other times bold and fierce. He practiced scales and chords over and over, repeating them until his fingers ached. Every mistake was a lesson, and every success was a spark that kept him going. He didn't need applause to know that progress was happening. He could feel it in his body, in the way music flowed through him and out into the air. He also learned to listen, not just to music but to life itself, the way the wind whispered through trees, the rhythm of raindrops on the roof. Even the sound of footsteps in the street became part of his understanding of sound. He discovered that music was more than notes on a page. It was a reflection of life, of feeling, and of connection. And he wanted his music to speak the truth of all those things he felt inside but couldn't say with words. Despite all his dedication, doubt never fully left him. Some days he would pause mid-practice, staring at the floor, wondering if any of it mattered. What if I fail again? He thought. What if no one ever listens? But those doubts were always met with the same quiet determination that had carried him this far. He reminded himself that the first step to being heard was learning to hear himself. And if he could do that, everything else would follow. To push himself further, he began challenging small limits. He would try more difficult pieces, notes that made his fingers bleed, rhythms that tested his patience. Sometimes the music would go horribly wrong and he would stop, frustrated, but he never gave up. Instead, he would pause, take a deep breath, and try again. Over time, the mistakes became fewer, and the music began to flow more naturally. He was learning a secret. Talent alone was never enough. Persistence, patience, and love for the craft mattered just as much. He also tried to connect with other musicians, cautiously at first. Some were kind and encouraging, giving advice or sharing tips, while others were impatient, quick to dismiss him because he didn't move or act like the others. But he took every kind word to heart, letting it fuel his practice, and ignored the harsh ones. Over time, he realized that it wasn't the approval of others that mattered. It was the belief in himself. That belief became his armor, helping him face every new day with courage. In these quiet moments, he found small joys. A perfect chord that rang true, a melody that made him smile, or even the memory of someone's brief nod of encouragement. Each tiny victory was a reminder that his efforts were not in vain. And though no one outside his practice space could see these victories, he knew they were shaping him into someone ready for the moment the world could no longer ignore. He started imagining performances in his head. He would picture himself on stage playing for a crowd, feeling the music in every person present. These imagined performances were his secret motivation. Sometimes he would close his eyes and play as if he were already there, hearing the audience's gasp, their applause, their awe. Even though it was just in his mind, it gave him a sense of hope. One day it wouldn't be imagination, it would be real. During this time, he also learned about patience in life. Rejection had taught him that good things often take time, that progress is not always visible, and that people may never understand the journey until they witness the result. And so he practiced quietly, choosing focus over frustration, love over anger, and determination over despair. Each day became a step toward the moment he would finally be seen. Even his family noticed a subtle change. The way he carried himself, the focus in his eyes, the way he could lose himself in sound. It was becoming clear that music was not just a hobby or escape. It was his life, and slowly they began to understand that his brokenness was not weakness, but the quiet strength of someone who refused to surrender to the world's indifference. There were moments when hope seemed fragile, like a candle flickering in the wind. A missed audition or a cold rejection would sting sharply, but each time he returned to his practice with renewed commitment. He had learned that resilience was built not in success but in the persistence to continue when no one believed in you, and every day that he played he grew stronger, not just in skill but in spirit. As he practiced, he began to notice small changes in himself. His movements became more confident, his notes more precise, and his music more expressive. He felt alive in ways he hadn't before, as if each practice session peeled away layers of fear and self-doubt. Music was teaching him patience, empathy, and the quiet power of persistence, the kind of lessons that no school or teacher could ever give. Though the world had turned away, he was preparing. Every note he struck, every melody he practiced, every hour of quiet determination was a step toward something larger than himself. He didn't know when the right moment would come, but he knew it would. And when it did, the world would finally hear the truth he had carried inside all along. He was not broken, he was whole. And so he continued day after day, never stopping, never surrendering. Each practice, each quiet note, was a promise to himself that one day he would play for the world. The first note he would strike on that stage would not just be music, it would be a declaration. It would be the sound of resilience, courage, and the human spirit refusing to be ignored. In the quiet of his practice room, he imagined that moment often. The lights, the crowd, the breathless anticipation before the first note. And deep in his heart, he knew that if he could make it through the years of rejection, despair, and solitude, the world would have no choice but to listen. The first note was coming, and it would change everything. The day finally arrived. He had been invited to perform at a small local venue, a quiet hall with worn wooden floors and faded curtains. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to show the world a glimpse of what he could do. Enough to finally step out of the shadows. He felt a mix of excitement and fear. His heart raced as he carried his instrument toward the stage. Every step seemed heavy, weighted with years of rejection and doubt. As he approached the stage, he saw the audience waiting. Some were curious, some skeptical, and some openly indifferent. They had heard whispers of the broken musician, the one who had struggled to be heard. A few people whispered behind their hands, shaking their heads as if to say, "Why bother? He'll fail." For a moment, he almost felt the weight of every no he had ever received pressing down on him. He took a deep breath and reminded himself of all the hours he had spent practicing in solitude, the countless mistakes he had corrected, the tiny victories that no one had seen. Those moments had prepared him for this. They had made him strong, made him patient, made him ready. He may have been underestimated by the world, but he had never underestimated himself. The lights dimmed slightly and he sat down, placing his fingers carefully on his instrument. Silence filled the room, a heavy, expectant silence. The audience waited, and then with one slow, deliberate breath he played the first note. It was simple, quiet, almost fragile, but it was perfect. The sound hung in the air, resonating through the hall, touching each person in a way that words never could. Eyes widened. Conversation stopped. Even the skeptics leaned forward, unsure of what they were hearing, but unable to look away. With each note that followed, the music grew bolder, more expressive. It told a story of struggle, hope, and resilience. It carried the weight of every rejection, every lonely practice session, every whispered judgment he had endured. And yet it also carried joy, courage, and the quiet triumph of someone who had refused to give up. People began to shift in their seats. A few leaned closer, captivated by the unexpected depth and beauty of his performance. Some wiped tears from their eyes, moved by the raw emotion in every note. No one spoke, no one interrupted. The music had captured them completely. It was as if time itself had paused, waiting to witness the truth of his talent. He closed his eyes, lost in the music, feeling every vibration, every echo. He didn't notice the audience anymore. He only noticed the story unfolding through his fingers, the emotion carried in every chord. For the first time in his life, he felt seen, not by words, not by recognition, but by the shared experience of music connecting hearts. When the last note faded into silence, there was a pause, an almost imperceptible moment where the world held its breath. And then slowly applause began, one clap, then another, until the room was filled with sound. People stood, some cheering, some crying, all moved by the performance they had not expected to witness. He opened his eyes, surprised by the intensity of the reaction. For the first time, he realized that the world could be different. The people who had doubted him, who had called him broken, were now acknowledging his gift. And in that moment, he understood something he had never fully realized before. The first note had the power to change everything. It wasn't just music, it was proof. Proof that resilience matters, that talent persists even in the face of doubt, and that the human spirit can overcome even the harshest judgment. Every rejection he had faced, every moment of loneliness, every whispered no had led to this moment. And now the world could no longer ignore him. After the performance, people came forward. Some offered heartfelt congratulations, others asked to learn from him, and a few even apologized for doubting him. For the first time, he felt recognized not just for his skill, but for the courage it had taken to keep playing when no one believed in him. That night, as he left the venue, he felt a quiet sense of triumph. He had not only played music, he had told a story. He had transformed years of pain and rejection into something beautiful, something that resonated with everyone who had witnessed it. And in doing so, he discovered that being broken was not the end. It was the beginning. From that night forward, his life began to change. Invitations to perform came more frequently. People sought his guidance, and his story began to inspire others. But the most important thing he carried with him was not fame, recognition, or applause. It was the knowledge that he had remained true to himself, that he had trusted in his talent and perseverance, and that the first note he played had been worth every struggle that came before it. And so, the world that had once turned away was now listening, captivated and changed because a single note, played with courage and honesty, had reminded them all of the power of hope, determination, and the human heart. After that first unforgettable performance, things began to change, slowly at first, then more quickly than he could have imagined. People who had once dismissed him now wanted to meet him, to learn from him, to work with him. Invitations to perform at other venues started coming in. Some were small, like the first one, but others were larger, reaching audiences he had only dreamed of. For the first time in his life, he felt that his efforts were being recognized, not just the music he played, but the years of struggle, the quiet determination and the resilience that had brought him to this point. It wasn't about fame or applause. It was about being seen finally for who he truly was. Despite the growing attention, he remained humble. He remembered the years of rejection, the moments when no one believed in him. Those experiences had shaped him, had taught him patience, and had made him realize the true value of his gift. He wanted to honor that journey, not just chase recognition. Every performance, every note he played, carried that history with it. People were amazed not only by his talent, but also by the emotion he conveyed through his music. Every note told a story of struggle, hope, and triumph. Audiences were captivated by the raw honesty in his performances. They could sense the years of perseverance behind each melody. They saw more than skill. They saw the human spirit triumphing over adversity. His life began to shift in other ways too. He gained opportunities to mentor young musicians, people who were just starting and facing their own challenges. He shared not only technical advice, but also stories of resilience, explaining that rejection did not mean the end. He encouraged them to keep playing, to keep dreaming, and to trust in themselves no matter what the world said. Even his personal life began to transform. Friends and family who had watched him struggle for years were finally able to celebrate his achievements. They saw him walking with confidence, speaking with purpose, and smiling more freely. They could see that the person they had always believed in, the one who never gave up, was finally being acknowledged by the world. Despite all the recognition, he never forgot the lessons he had learned during the years of struggle. He knew that fame could be fleeting, that applause could fade, and that people could sometimes turn away again. But he also knew that his music was his own, that it had always been a reflection of who he was, and that no one could ever take that away from him. As invitations to perform in larger venues arrived, he felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Each opportunity was a chance to share his story with more people, to touch more hearts, and to prove that being labeled broken had never meant he was weak. And each time he stepped onto a stage, he carried with him the memory of the long years of quiet practice, rejection, and perseverance. Audiences continued to be amazed. not only by his technical skill but by the emotion and honesty he poured into his music. Critics began to write glowing reviews, describing performances that moved people to tears. But beyond the reviews and recognition, he found something far more valuable: the knowledge that he had stayed true to himself, that he had trusted his journey, and that his dedication had finally been seen and appreciated. His story also began to inspire others in unexpected ways. People who had faced rejection in their own lives, musicians, artists, students, even ordinary people struggling with challenges, found hope in his journey. They realized that setbacks were not the end, that persistence could lead to breakthroughs, and that even when the world turns away, one can still rise one note at a time. Through it all, he remained focused on what mattered most: the music itself. Fame, recognition, and applause were welcome, but they were not the reason he played. He played because music had saved him, had given him purpose, and had allowed him to express emotions he could not put into words. And as he continued to perform, teach, and inspire, he found that his gift was bigger than himself. It had the power to change lives, just as his life had been changed by the first person who had truly listened to him. Each performance became more than just music. It became a celebration of resilience, a testament to the human spirit, and a reminder that anyone, no matter how many times they are turned away, can find their voice. The world had once called him broken, but now, through every note, every melody, and every performance, he showed that being broken had never defined him. It had only prepared him to rise higher than anyone could have imagined. And so, his life transformed in ways he had never thought possible. From being overlooked and underestimated, he became a symbol of hope, courage, and the power of perseverance. People no longer whispered doubts; they listened, they learned, and they were moved. And through it all, he never stopped believing that even the smallest note, played with honesty and heart, could change everything. Years had passed since that first unforgettable performance. The musician, once dismissed as broken, had transformed not only his own life but also the lives of countless others. Invitations to perform around the world had come steadily, and audiences from cities far and wide were captivated by his talent and emotion. But through all the success, he remained the same person who had spent years practicing in quiet corners, learning patience and resilience. He often reflected on the journey that had brought him here. Every rejection, every whispered doubt, every moment of despair had shaped him, teaching him lessons that no applause or recognition could ever replace. He understood now that failure was never final. It was part of the process. And that first note, played in a small, dimly lit hall, had been the key that unlocked a life he had once only dreamed of. As he stepped onto the stage for one of the largest performances of his career, he felt the same mixture of nerves and excitement he had felt years ago. The crowd was enormous, filling the venue with energy and expectation. Yet instead of fear, he felt gratitude. Gratitude for the music that had carried him, for the people who had believed in him, and for every challenge that had shaped his path. When he played that first note, it was as powerful as ever. The sound cut through the air, filled the hearts of the audience, and reminded everyone listening why they had come. Each melody he performed told a story of struggle, hope, and triumph. People were moved to tears, some cheering, some simply sitting in awe. His music was no longer just a personal expression. It had become a universal message of resilience and courage. He had also become a mentor and inspiration to countless aspiring musicians and artists. Young people who once doubted themselves or were told they would never succeed looked up to him as proof that persistence pays off. He reminded them that talent alone was not enough. It was the combination of passion, dedication, and belief in oneself that led to true success. And he shared openly that the journey would not be easy, but it would be worth it. Beyond music, his story began to influence the world in other ways. Interviews, documentaries, and stories of his rise from rejection to recognition encouraged people to pursue their own dreams, no matter how impossible they seemed. They saw in him a reflection of the human spirit, one that could rise, endure, and shine even when the world turned away. He often thought back to that time when the world had labeled him broken. The memory no longer hurt. It inspired him. He realized that those words had not defined him. They had only given him the motivation to prove the world wrong, not for vengeance, but for the pure love of music and life. Every note he played carried that story, the story of a person who had refused to be defined by other people's doubts. His family, Friends and students celebrated his success, but the musician never let it change who he was. He remained humble, approachable, and deeply committed to his art. For him, music was never about recognition or fame. It was about connecting hearts, sharing emotions, and transforming lives, just as his life had been transformed by the first person who truly listened. As he played one final piece that night, the audience erupted in applause not just for the music, but for the journey it represented. People who had once walked away from him now stood in awe, witnessing the culmination of years of persistence, courage, and unwavering belief in oneself. The room was alive with energy, but the real magic was invisible. It was the story of resilience that had carried him here, note by note, year by year. In the end, he understood that being called broken had been a gift in disguise. It had forced him to dig deeper, to practice harder, and to discover strengths he never knew existed. It had taught him patience, perseverance, and the true meaning of success. And when he looked out at the crowd that night, he saw not just fans, but people who had been touched by his journey, inspired to face their own challenges, and reminded that even the smallest note played with courage and heart could change everything. His legacy was more than music. It was hope, inspiration, and proof that the human spirit can triumph over doubt and adversity. And though the world had once turned away, it had finally listened, not only to his notes but to the story behind them, a story that would continue to inspire generations to come.